Lorwyn, Chapter 17. Tersen Nath of the Gilt-Leaf Packs, the exquisite Alpha who fed and protected the tribe with strength and honor, about whom songs had been sung in the Gilt-Leaf Hall of glorious Lizalania, the guardian of perfection and the protector of the blessed nation, had begun to daydream like a bored apprentice. But where an apprentice would waste his time dreaming of gold, glory, or perhaps a racy fantasy, Tesennath dreamed of killing Kifkin. Sometimes he imagined scenarios in which the Kifkin rose up against the elves and suffered extermination en masse as a result. If he felt like a meditation upon tactics and strategy, he invariably found himself plotting a siege of Kinsbale that spread to every rat-infested hovel the barely sentient little creatures had built along the river Wanderwine. Most often he dwelled about the many ways he would like to eliminate Gadok Teague. Dismemberment, immolation, a long, slow death on a long, dull pike, skinning alive, drowning in a vat of vile Kifkin wine. He had begun to entertain yet another method of ending the Sen's life, forcing Teague to cut himself open and then feeding the fool's intestines to the cuffhounds, when the object of his dark fantasy tromped self-importantly through the open door. Nath did not believe in closed doors. Elves did not lie to their lessers and had no need to conceal. Nath did, however, like to hear the goings-on outside his new field headquarters, if only to keep track of how many Kifkin he would eventually kill when he finally lost control. Teague was the only Kifkin Nath had told personally to knock before entering, and invariably the Sen never did. Perhaps a nice flaying, Nath thought. 200 lashes at least. His men could use the entertainment and Teague should die screaming in pain, or shouldn't die at all. My dear son, Teague said. The Kifkin bowed deeply, far too deeply and promptly, far too promptly, before he rose to face Nath and boldly looked him in the eye. Far too boldly. Teague, Nath said with a glower, spit it out. Yes, thank you, Teague scraped pathetically. I've a message for you, an important message. It's from Dane Griffith. He reports, Nath roared, leaping to his feet in fury and snatching the scroll from the Kifkin's sweaty hand. How dare you read an official? As this is operational intelligence, my Tersan, I assumed it was within my purview to offer you an assessment of the information, Teague said quickly. But that is not all. And who handed this to you? What fool? I do not choose our allies, Tersan, said the elf who strode into the office at that moment. But I followed procedure. In the event I should be incapacitated, I sent the message through an adjutant for assessment. This creature was the only one available. Creature? Why, Quiet, Nath snapped. Dane Griffith, he continued, losing none of his menace. You could certainly have delivered this personally if you were able to hand it to him. I take responsibility for sending a scout back with that report, Griffith replied. A full day ago. I see now that I was in error. When you did not reply, I returned to personally explain and offer myself up for any punishment you deemed fitting. It was certainly not my intention to allow an animal to peruse my findings. Nath was genuinely surprised the Kifkin had not objected to being called an animal. Perhaps he could be trained after all. And your findings are? The report read in essence that the traitor would be returning soon, and I included a plan of ambush. Unfortunately, the circumstances have made most of that report obsolete. Out with it, before I have you cleaning the Springjack stables, Nath barked, boiling with impatience. The Kifkin returns with a Flamekin prisoner. She has been extinguished, but there are still a few hours in which... Fine, Naf said. And the new information? She is returning via Windbow, Griffith said, a Kifkin contrivance that gives a skilled user the power of flight. However, Naf said darkly, it appears that Reese too has gained that power. He's headed here with that Mornsong stranger. They are, well, flying, Ter? Ridiculous. The traitor has been seen in the company of fairies. They are surprisingly strong for insects, Ter. Perhaps this is not the problem it seems, the Sen offered. Archer Bailey knows time is of the essence. She will head directly to the Red U. So, Naf said. No, I think I understand what he's getting at, Griffith said, and risked defending his Ter Sen by staying one step ahead. We could position archers atop the buildings ringing the square. With the way the forest rises over those buildings, we'd be concealed from the Kinslayer until it was too late. We could take them from complete surprise. Yes, Naf said. It could work. He was a trifle annoyed he had not thought of this, but he had not risen to become the Ter Sen by allowing such annoyances to keep him from taking advantage of an excellent plan. There would be time for him to discipline Dane Griffith later. That said, he definitely wasn't about to let his subordinate think he'd solved everything. He strode to the map of Kinsbale that Teague kept on the rear wall of the chamber. If that is, you position battle druids here, here, and here. Don't rely on fire arrows or lucky shots, do you understand? Yes, my Ter Sen. Naf turned to the Kifkin. Leave us, he commanded. But, Teague began, though he thought better of it when he saw Naf arch a single eyebrow. He gave a deep bow and shuffled backwards through the door. My Ter Sen, Griffith repeated, but this time it was a polite way of saying, and? You have an elf you trust, Naf asked him. I trust him enough to bring Reese down, Griffith said. Alok is his name. He's come far in a short time. Make sure he's prepared to deal with the druids. They can be prickly, Naf said. You and I, however, will be elsewhere. My Ter? This traitor, Naf said, and allowed himself a sigh of exasperation. He produced a scroll from Teague's desk and, dipping a quill into the inkwell, began to write. He has escaped death, and he has done it often. He has, Ter? Griffith nodded. My Ter, does this have to do with your... Then we must be prepared, mustn't we? Naf asked pointedly. He finished writing and handed the scroll to Griffith. The Ter Sen nodded, bidding the Dane to read the message. It read, The Sen is to not be trusted, though he must be tolerated for now. If he knows of the plan, there's a chance that the stranger or the traitor may be able to divine it. Carry through with the rooftop ambush, but keep half of your forces back, including your vine bread. All of your vine bread. Rendezvous at the following position. The remainder of the message described where Griffith's pack was to lie in wait. Naf was leaving nothing to chance. Griffith only hoped that when Reese finally paid for his treachery, he would be there to see his former Dane destroyed. Whether the battle druids did their job, or Naf, or Griffith himself. Every hour Reese continued to exist was an insult to the Guiltleaf elves and the memories of their noble hunters who had fallen victim to his abominable magic. Even those elves who had concealed their own blight for the good of the nation. It was a hypocrisy in which Griffith was slowly coming to terms, and which bothered Naf not in the slightest. How many hours have we got now? Reese asked. He squinted into the sinking sun and the piercing winds, involuntary tears streaking his face. He would have given a week's thread for a pair of the silver goggles his quarry had pulled down over her eyes once she'd taken to the air. It's sure to be inexact, Marilyn said, but if you assume that the Kifkin told you the truth, and we guess on the low side, that is about half a day.
Then the Flamekin has perhaps an hour or 3 left.
Why can't we catch up to them? She's flying a bow.
Faster! Ileona cried in a high-pitched, ear-splitting voice that was as close as she could come to a bellow. You pathetic flock of dung beetles! You can fly faster than this! What are you, flying squirrels? Are you fat, lazy Kifkin? Put your wings into it! You heard her, Visa shouted in support. Yeah, Endry added. Flap those wings, you bogging boggarts. Boggarts? Endry, there's no need to insult them, Visa said. I'm just getting them into the spirit of it, Endry replied. They're volunteers, Visa said. Poor blossoms, they can't even talk yet. Isn't that a little naive, Visa? Endry asked innocently. Bog you. No, bog you. Will you two focus for Bog's sake? Ileona hissed. Sorry, Ileona, the twins replied in unison, but one of them, Rhys could not tell, added, Bog you twice.
The trio was positioned at the fore of a flying pair, barking at the dozen other, much younger fairies hauling Marilyn and Rhys. As the clique was only too happy to point out, they could have easily carried Rhys alone, but not as far as he'd wanted to go. It was a nerve-wracking mode of travel for the passengers, but it was efficient. Rhys could not remember when he'd ever been in such an improbably deadly position, but he had to admit they never would have made it back to town in time had they not risked this insane plan. Rhys had to admit privately that he was impressed that the clique had been able to call out so many of their own kin to help, but figured the other fairies were merely hoping to be there when the elves hit the ground. They were moving fast, very fast, and the fairies showed no signs of tiring as yet, but they had lost much valuable time finding the Kifkin traitor. They had drawn within a quarter mile of Bridget's wingbow, but for the last half hour they had gotten no closer. Worse, there was really nothing they could do to stop the Kifkin at this distance. He considered sending some of the fairies to harass the Kifkin, but that raised the uncomfortable question. Even if he could do it, didn't that put Aisling at risk? Killing Bridget would obviously do the Flamekin no good, and a drop from this height would likely break her dying body beyond repair. And if the fall did not kill her, the time lost would do the trick. The hunter's instinct wanted to track this traitor and slaughter her, but his reasoning mind told him the best course of action was to follow her. After all, Rhys had been right about one thing. If Aisling was going to be healed, Kinsbale was the most likely place, and the Kifkin was taking her there anyway. The sensible course was to follow and arrive at the same time, taking Aisling back from the treacherous archer and finding elemental magic that could reignite her dying fires. With any luck, the Kifkin would be too busy listening to tales to notice. As for the elves occupying the town, that was another difficult question. The only answer he had would take him even further down the irredeemable path of a kinslayer. In for a Fred, in for a coil, Rhys muttered.
Gadok Teague, you said the elves would be gone by now,
Colfanor said softly, or as softly as he could.
All but my apprentice, and he was to have other duties. He was not to return here.
The Kifkin San had taken advantage of Naf's dismissal to consult the Yew, and to warn him the time was imminent. But thus far Teague had heard only criticism. How tired he was of criticism. Yet the Yew went on.
Why do they still hold this town hostage? Where is Rhys of the Guiltleaf? On his way, though I fear for his life. As to the elves themselves, what can I do, Sage Colfanor?
Teague asked. It took all of his considerable speaking ability to keep the quaver out of his voice.
They are here. They want in, and if you can't stop them, how can I? You know better than most that the Kifkin are not weak, Colfanor said. So please do not insult me, Teague.
Of course not, my sage, Teague stammered. I merely...
It is no matter.
The Yew rumbled dismissively, turning his eyes to the elves taking position on the surrounding rooftops.
He has become sentimental about this flamekin as I predicted he would. He will not risk killing her, I can feel it. He has no idea that I can read him so easily at this distance. Archer Bailey will bring the flamekin in time, my sage,
Teague interjected.
Every last Kifkin in town is willing her to succeed, and the fort weft is a powerful thing. It is at that, Colfanor admitted, but do not overestimate that power. It relies on numbers, and numbers can be reduced. Of course, the Sen said distractedly. But as for the other visitor, we are ready for that as well. I have no doubt, the tree folk replied. Your apprentice, Teague said. Are you not concerned? The elves. I do not make the choice of my students lightly, Teague, Colfanor said. Reese will survive despite your attempts to eliminate him. What? But Sage, I did not. You did, and Bridget Bailey attempted to carry out your order. Do not lie to me. If I'd expected you to succeed, I would have never allowed your moths to escape my sight. But it is done, Colfanor rumbled, and I have greater concerns than your treachery at this moment. But betray me again, and it will be the last time. Yes, Sage Colfanor, I am sorry. Sorry, perhaps that you were caught, Colfanor chided, but that is besides the point. Regardless, my student has some added protection. The Morn Song, Teague asked. That stranger. The one called Marilyn. She's a mystery to me. All I can sense is that she is strong. Stronger than she is let on. And she is determined to keep Reese alive. You put your faith in this stranger, my sage. She has every reason to ensure Reese's survival, the Red Yew said.
He took one last look at the hunters and druids lining the rooftops, then turned his wooden face back to the Sen, gazing just over Teague's head. When he spoke next, it was more loudly, jovial and friendly.
That's enough, Sen, I believe. As usual, your front row seat is available.
The Yew chuckled, and several dozen Kifkin voices laughed in agreement. Teague took a look around and realized that in the few minutes he'd spent talking to Colfanor, the square had become packed with Kifkin, gathered to hear the tales. The elves appeared to have fallen still on the rooftops, waiting to spring their trap. Teague nodded graciously to the Yew and turned to the townsfolk with the most charming smile he could wring out at the moment.
Thank you all for coming, he said. It is time for another unforgettable evening of tales. The first evening of this Festival of Tales, which I think we can all agree should prove a rousing success.
Teague waited a few moments for applause that didn't come, and then he drove on.
Let us thank the sage Colfanor for gracing us with his own tales and, of course, his presence.
A smattering of applause rolled through the square this time, including some surprised claps from stragglers piled up on the fringes of an ever-growing audience. With that, Teague bowed again, and moved to the comfortable, cushioned seat that was reserved exclusively for him. There was no more applause, but a burgeoning sense of anticipation spread rapidly through the town. The thought-weft was strong in Kinsbale and had never been stronger, when every Kifkin in sight was eagerly awaiting the start of the first day of tales. Especially those tales that would involve their hero, the one and only Bridget Bailey. And somewhere in the distance Teague knew the hero of Kinsbale felt the strength of their belief, even if Teague and Colfanor had twisted that belief to cause the hero to act egregiously out of character. We're close to Kinsbale now, Reese agreed. It looks like we're heading straight to the town square. Ileona? Yes, Tear, Captain Reese Tear, the fairy responded smartly.
Don't call me Captain, Reese said. Now listen, this is going to be tricky. As soon as Bridget and Aisling hit the ground, we have to do the same. We'll then have to convince the Kifkin to help us save the Flamekin. I doubt they're going to be open to the idea, to say nothing of what the elves are going to try. But we're not here to stay, or to listen to the tales.
I suppose you'll need a ride back then, piped up one of the fairies, clinging to his shoulder. Quiet, you, Ileana snapped.
Reese sighed. The closer they got to Kinsbale, the stronger the sense that Culfanor had betrayed him grew. We have to find a Kifkin who can contact this elemental fire, however it's done.
And then we all return to the bosque? Marilyn asked.
If we make it back to the river, and if Sig has returned to Kinsbale.
You don't trust your own mentor, Reese, the Mornsong stranger said. It's written all over your face. Why are you so determined to get back to the bosque? For him?
I swore an oath, Reese said. One of many, and it's not negotiable on my end. Even if Culfanor knew what Bridget was planning, and I'm still not sure he did.
So what do you want us to do, Tear? Ileana asked.
Keep us on the Kifkin's tail, and do not overcome her as she slows. We do not want to knock her out of the sky. As if on cue, twin blasts of dark green energy slammed into Reese and Marilyn simultaneously, and 24 young fairies died in an instant, without even time to squeal as the druidic magic dried them to twigs. The energy had only stunned Reese, but now they were falling, and falling faster than he would have liked. Reese saw Kifkin gathered around a familiar red hue that turned his face upwards and locked eyes with Reese's own.
Do not tense up,
Culfanor's voice rang in his head.
Reese? A pair of hands shook him by the shoulders. Reese! The woman said more urgently.
He recognized the voice, but he couldn't remember to whom it belonged.
Marilyn. Yes, Marilyn. That was her name.
Reese blinked open eyes wet with blood. His own. He gingerly touched a nasty gash that ran between the stumps of his horns from which the blood flowed freely, and instinctively whispered a minor suture spell, one that required no reagents, that closed the wound. Reese would need to apply real stitches or better healing magic later, but for the moment it would keep the blood out of his eyes and in his head if he was careful. He blinked again, and the red haze cleared away in an instant. Reese remembered where he was and how he had gotten there. The fairies. The fairies that had carried them were no more, and the Vendilion clique was nowhere in sight. Reese and Marilyn lay in a small circle of sponge moss that had miraculously saved them from much more than bruises. Dozens of wide-eyed Kifkin surrounded them. Reese saw Culfanor, along with Bridget and the motionless form of Aisling. A few of the Kifkin had helped the archer to her feet, while others had taken Aisling and were propping her up against Culfanor's trunk.
Culfanor, Reese croaked. Why?
There was no answer, mental or otherwise, for several seconds. Then, just as Reese and Marilyn had regained their footing, there was an answer of sorts, but not from Culfanor. Perhaps a better question, Naf asked as he stepped from the front door of the Sen's office, is how you ever thought you would leave here alive, Kinslayer. Reese ached to the bone. He'd lost more blood than he even knew he had, and he had yet to recover from the full expenditure of energy he'd used to patch up Bridget's arm. Another so-called good deed that was going to bring evil returns in the long run. Marilyn appeared just as weary. Defiantly, he turned to his former Ter Sen. Call me what you will, he said, but you're not keeping me from the Flamekin. You know me, Naf, and I know you, even if you won't speak my name. Even in this condition, I can beat you in a fair fight. You think this is a fair fight? Naf said, and then he chuckled. Nath snapped his fingers and Rhys heard a familiar voice, Griffith's, issue the order to drop glamours. The moment he did, Rhys saw that he and probably Kinsbale, to say nothing of Marilyn or the dying Aisling, were utterly outnumbered. Elves were everywhere, of course, stepping out from behind their invisibility glamours to aim arrows and swords in his direction. But more disconcerting were the Vinebred. Vinebred were artful and beautiful, but these had been created with only murder in mind. And the fact that they were revealed to be standing in the middle of Kinsbale sent a wave of revulsion through Rhys. He'd never particularly cared for the Vinebred, though he could appreciate them aesthetically. It was not the appearance, but the idea of the Vinebred that made him so uneasy. He disliked any form of magic that prevented a hunter from being a hunter. With the creation of Vinebred, elves became slave masters and borderline necromancers. Rhys counted at least 10, many of whom were stationed outside major buildings bordering the square. True, they were effective, and a way to make even the most useless beings serve a beautiful purpose for the Gilt-Leaf Nation. Still, it truly bothered Rhys that Nath had obviously chosen to rely on them so heavily. Finally, Rhys spotted the Dane who had issued the order to drop glamours. Griffith strolled among the wreckage, a silver saber in his hand, clearly intent on challenging Rhys right then and there. Well, Rhys said, stooping momentarily to scoop up a loose piece of cobblestone that would serve as a weapon until he could get a better one. I don't suppose we could discuss this, like rational elves?
I'm going to enjoy watching you die, filth, Griffith said.
The Dane took another step forward, but Nath stopped him in his tracks. Dane Griffith, the Tersen said.
Give Rhys your sword.
Rhys could not tell which had shocked his former friend more, that Nath had called Rhys by name, or that the Tersen had ordered Griffith to give up his weapon.
Ter, he objected, the outlaw.
Give him your sword, Dane, Nath said. I have decided to grant this elf a hunter's death.
He called you an elf, Marilyn whispered. That's good, isn't it?
I suppose, Rhys replied, and I'd be ecstatic if it weren't for the death part.